After losing everything, I stood on my son's doorstep, only to be called filthy by his wife and told I couldn't stay in their guest room. My son just watched. They dismissed me to a stable hand job, telling me their car would smell. But as I walked away, a familiar fire sparked inside me. You won't believe what happened next. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. The crisp autumn air, usually a comfort on the rolling plains of her farm, now felt like a cruel mockery against Ellie's 63-year-old face. It had been weeks since the auctioneer's gavel struck. Weeks since her family farm, the land that had cradled generations of her kin, was ripped from her grasp. Now, standing on the manicured doorstep of her son Ben's suburban home, Ellie felt a profound emptiness that echoed the hollow ache in her chest. Heartbreak and shame were bitter companions, weighing her down more than the small, worn duffel bag clutched in her hand. The pristine white door felt like an impenetrable barrier, separating her from the life she knew, from everything she had. The door swung open, revealing Ben, his shoulders slumped, eyes heavy with an exhaustion that seemed to predate her arrival. Beside him, his wife Serena stood like a perfectly sculpted mannequin, her smile a thin, brittle line that never quite reached her eyes. The air immediately thickened with an unspoken tension, an invisible wall rising between them. "Mother," Ben mumbled, his voice flat, his gaze flickering nervously between Ellie and Serena. Serena, however, wasted no time on pleasantries. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, swept over Ellie's practical, mud-splattered boots and her faded work jacket, a silent judgment delivered with chilling precision. "Ellie," she began, her tone a careful blend of feigned concern and thinly veiled disgust. "My goodness, you're absolutely filthy, covered in dirt." She didn't move to embrace her, didn't even offer a sympathetic glance. Instead, she took a subtle step back, as if Ellie carried a contagion. Ellie's cheeks flushed hot with humiliation. She had spent the last 2 days packing the last remnants of her life, saying goodbye to what was hers. Cleanliness had been the least of her concerns. "I'm so sorry, dear," she murmured, her voice a rough whisper. "I can clean up. Just point me to the bathroom. I can have a shower, wash up." Serena's laughter, sharp and dismissive, sliced through the quiet apology. It was a sound designed to belittle, to mock. "Honey, this isn't about a shower," she chirped, waving a manicured hand dismissively. "This is about this whole situation." Her gaze flicked pointedly to Ben, then back to Ellie, loaded with unspoken criticism. The situation was Ellie herself, her unexpected arrival, her unwanted presence. "And about a place to stay," Ellie ventured, her voice barely audible. "I was hoping, perhaps the guest room?" The words felt like gash in her mouth. She knew the guest room. It was always perfectly made, ready for company. Surely for her own son's mother. Serena's smile hardened. "Oh no, Ellie, absolutely not." Her voice dropped slightly, taking on a theatrical tone of worry. "We simply couldn't. Imagine what people would say. Our reputation, you understand. Having you here, after everything, it just wouldn't do." The implication hung heavy in the air. Ellie was a stain on their carefully constructed facade of success and respectability. Her misfortune was a blight they couldn't risk exposing. Ben, her only child, stood rooted to the spot, his hands shoved into his pockets. He couldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed somewhere on the polished floorboards. He cleared his throat, a weak, almost imperceptible sound, but no words of defense, no offer of solace, no sign of the son she had raised came forth. Ellie felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. It wasn't just the farm she had lost, it was him too. Serena, seemingly emboldened by Ben's silence, pulled out her phone, tapping at the screen with an air of decisive efficiency. "However," she announced, her eyes still scanning the device, "I might have found a solution. The Sterlings, the ones with the sprawling estate just outside town, they're looking for a stable hand, someone to help with the horses, upkeep the grounds a bit." She paused, her eyes finally lifting to meet Ellie's, a smirk playing on her lips. "It sounds perfect for someone with your mother's background, wouldn't you say, Ben?" She didn't wait for Ben's input. The thinly veiled insult, the suggestion that Ellie, a woman who had run a thriving farm for decades, was only fit for menial labor, was excruciating. Ellie's pride, already shattered, crumbled further. She had just 237 to her name, a meager sum that wouldn't last a week. Her options were non-existent. A stable hand, she repeated, the words tasting foreign. Yes, and it even includes a room, Serena chirped, clearly pleased with her solution. A rustic room, of course, above the stables, and they're offering $800 a month. Very generous for the work. She spoke as if she were doing Ellie a tremendous favor, not consigning her to a life of servitude. Ellie swallowed hard, the bitter taste of helplessness coating her tongue. I'll take it, she said, her voice hollow. Serena's smile widened genuinely this time, a flash of triumph in her eyes. She dialed a number on her phone. Caroline, darling, Serena here. Yes, lovely. Listen, I've got the perfect person for your stable hand position. My mother-in-law, Ellie. Oh, she's wonderful. So much experience with horses, being from a farming background and all. Yes, absolutely dedicated. I just know she'll be a godsend for you. Serena's voice was saccharine sweet, a stark contrast to the venom she had just spit at Ellie. The lie about experience with horses felt like another layer of insult, suggesting Ellie needed artificial embellishment even for this humble position. After a few more moments of effusive praise and false pleasantries, Serena hung up. Right then, she said, turning back to Ellie, her voice businesslike once more. Caroline is expecting you by tomorrow morning. I'm afraid you'll need to take the bus. We can't have our car smelling like, well, you understand. Her eyes flicked to Ellie's boots again, a final cutting dismissal. Ellie nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, a desperate attempt to appear unaffected. She understood. She understood that her life as she knew it was gone. She understood that her son, the boy she had nurtured and loved, had chosen his wife's approval over his mother's dignity. She understood that she was now nothing more than a burden, a problem to be solved, and then a stranger to be kept at arm's length. Without another word, Ellie turned and walked out the door, the chill of the evening air doing little to numb the searing pain in her heart. She didn't look back. The bus stop was only a few blocks away, a stark reminder of her new reality. As the bus lumbered through the familiar streets, now alien to her, a flicker ignited deep within Ellie. It was a familiar spark, a stubborn refusal to be broken, a quiet defiance that had seen her through drought, harsh winters, and lean years on the farm. She had always found a way, and she would find a way again. The sprawling Sterling estate was a world away from the manicured, sterile suburbia of Ben and Serena's home. A winding gravel driveway flanked by ancient oak trees led to a grand but not ostentatious house. Beyond it, a magnificent stable complex, built of warm, dark wood, stood proudly against the backdrop of rolling green pastures. As Ellie approached, a soft whinny carried on the breeze, a sound that immediately eased the tightness in her chest. Here, among the silent giants, she found a strange comfort, a sense of belonging that had been cruelly denied her elsewhere. The horses wouldn't judge her worn clothes, her calloused hands, or the sorrow etched onto her face. They simply were. Mrs. Caroline Sterling emerged from the stable doors, a tall, graceful woman with kind eyes that held a hint of sadness. Her smile was genuine, reaching her eyes, and there was an immediate warmth about her that felt nothing like Serena's icy facade. Ellie, you must be Ellie, Caroline said, her voice soft and welcoming. She extended a hand, her grip firm and sincere. Thank you for coming, and please forgive Serena. She means well, but Caroline trailed off, a slight apology in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement of her sister-in-law's brusqueness. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Ellie. It's no trouble at all, Mrs. Sterling, Ellie replied, her voice huskier than usual. The loft looks perfect. She had already caught a glimpse of her new living quarters, a small, cozy space above the stables. It was simple, with a bed, a small table, and a window overlooking the pastures, but to Ellie, it felt like a palace. After 2 nights of restless sleep curled up in the cramped cab of her old pickup truck, before she had to sell it for gas money, this small sanctuary was a luxury beyond measure. Carolyn led Ellie into the stables, the rich, earthy scent of hay and horse filling the air. We have 12 magnificent horses, Ellie, she explained, her voice softening as she introduced each one by name. There's Apollo, our retired show jumper, and Bella, a sweet mare who loves apples. And then, Carolyn paused, her voice tinged with a deeper sorrow, we have our special case, Shadow. She led Ellie to the last stall at the end of the aisle. Behind the sturdy wooden bars, a majestic black stallion stood, his coat gleaming like polished obsidian even in the muted light. But his stance was rigid, his muscles tense, and his eyes, usually a vibrant, intelligent brown, were dulled with a profound emptiness. He stood withdrawn, almost pressed against the far wall, his head bowed. Shadow was in a terrible trailer wreck 6 months ago, Carolyn explained, her voice a hushed whisper. Physically, he's healed beautifully, but emotionally, he's a different horse. He barely tolerates anyone, and he hasn't been out of this stall since. Just then, a small, dark-haired girl, no older than 5, appeared at the stable entrance. Her large blue eyes, mirroring the sadness in her mother's, landed on Shadow's stall. A tremor ran through her tiny frame, and a look of profound terror flickered across her face. "Lily!" Carolyn called out, her voice gentle but firm. "Come meet Ellie, darling." But Lily didn't move. She merely stared at Shadow's dark form for another beat, then spun around and bolted back toward the house, her small footsteps echoing on the gravel. Carolyn sighed, a heavy, weary sound. "That's my daughter, Lily," she said, her voice filled with a mother's deep concern. Before the accident, she and Shadow were inseparable. She used to spend hours with him, brushing his mane, whispering secrets into his ear. Now, she gestured helplessly towards the empty stable entrance. She barely speaks, and she won't go near any of the horses, especially Shadow. It's like she has PTSD, a little girl trapped by fear. Ellie felt a pang in her heart, a familiar ache for a creature suffering in silence, and for a child lost in a world of fear. "My husband Richard is considering putting Shadow down," Carolyn confessed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He says it's not fair to keep him like this, that he's suffering too much. And for Lily, it's a constant reminder of the trauma. But I just can't bring myself to do it. He's such a magnificent animal, and he was so good to Lily." Ellie spent the rest of the day diligently working, mucking stalls, grooming the other horses, and tidying the feed room. She moved with an easy competence, her hands accustomed to the rhythm of farm life. But with every stroke of the brush, with every forkful of hay, her thoughts kept returning to Shadow, the broken stallion, and to Lily, the broken little girl. Their silent suffering resonated with her own recent losses, a shared language of hurt that transcended species. As evening descended, casting long shadows across the stable, Ellie finished her tasks. The other horses were settled, their gentle munching a soothing backdrop. She made her way back to Shadow's stall, a bucket of fresh water and a handful of sweet hay in her hand. She placed them carefully within reach, then sat down on a small stool just outside his stall, leaning against the sturdy wood. "Hey there, big guy," she murmured, her voice soft and low. She didn't try to touch him, just sat, her presence calm and unthreatening. "I know how you feel, Shadow. I really do. Sometimes when everything goes wrong, it feels like you're broken, doesn't it? Like you've forgotten how to trust, how to just be." She gazed at his still, dark form. He didn't react, didn't even twitch an ear, but Ellie kept talking, her words a quiet balm in the silent stable. "I lost everything, you know, my farm, my home, even my son. It feels like he's gone too. So I get it. The fear, the anger, the feeling that you'll never be whole again." She paused, remembering. "I had a horse once, Midnight. Beautiful mare, just like you. And she spooked once, threw me clean over a fence. Broke my arm, and I thought I'd never ride her again. Thought she hated me, or that I'd never trust her." Ellie leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confiding whisper. "But accidents happen, don't they? And sometimes it's not anyone's fault. It just is. And you just have to find a way to remember what it felt like before. To remember the good parts." As Ellie spoke, something subtle shifted. Shadow, who had been a statue for so long, took a small step forward, his ears twitching almost imperceptibly towards her voice. It was a tiny movement, a mere ripple in his rigid stance. But to Ellie, it was a profound sign. A flicker of engagement, a hint that perhaps, deep within his traumatized spirit, a connection might still be possible. The fragile connection Ellie felt blooming between her and Shadow, the stallion's ears twitching in a silent acknowledgement of her presence, was abruptly shattered by the jarring ring of her old flip phone. She fumbled for it, her hand shaking slightly as she saw Ben's name on the caller ID. Her heart, which had just begun to thaw, clenched with a familiar anxiety. "Hello, Ben," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Ben's voice, when it came, was strained, almost hesitant. "Mom, are you settling in all right?" Before Ellie could properly answer, she heard a sharp whisper in the background, unmistakably Serena's. "Just ask her already, Ben. Don't be a coward." Ben cleared his throat, the hesitation gone, replaced by a forced confidence that didn't quite hide the underlying weakness. "Look, Mom, Serena needs a little help. For some cosmetic procedures. It's really important for her work, you know. We were hoping you could lend us $500. Ellie's breath hitched. $500. It was nearly two-thirds of her entire monthly income. She had exactly $237 to her name, and her first paycheck from the Sterlings wouldn't arrive for weeks. "Ben, She struggled to find the words, the absurdity of the request battling with the pain of his expectations. "I simply can't. I'm barely making ends meet here. $800 a month doesn't go very far, especially when you're starting from scratch." The polite facade evaporated instantly. Ben's tone turned cold, accusatory. "Barely making ends meet? After everything we did for you, Mom, finding you a place to stay? You just lost everything, remember? And now you're going to be selfish?" The words hit her like a physical blow, each one a sharp reminder of her displacement, her utter dependence, and their perceived generosity. The irony was suffocating. A familiar ache settled deep within Ellie's chest. It was the same ache she felt when she realized her son's priorities had shifted entirely, when his loyalty had become intertwined with Serena's demands. He was no longer the boy who would stand up for her, but a man molded by another's expectations. From within his stall, Shadow let out a soft nicker, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to acknowledge her distress. Ellie looked up, and in the dim light, she could almost imagine the majestic stallion watching her with concerned, intelligent eyes, a silent witness to her renewed heartbreak. It was a strange comfort, more empathy than she had received from her own son. "I have to go, Ben," she said, her voice tight with unshed tears. She hung up before he could respond, the phone feeling heavy and cold in her hand. The next morning at breakfast in the Sterling's sunny kitchen, Lily appeared, a tiny figure clutching a worn, faded stalled horse tightly to her chest. Her eyes, usually sparkling with childlike curiosity, were shadowed with a deep sadness, and she moved with a hesitant, almost fearful grace. She was mute, her little face pale, and she flinched perceptibly at the clatter of a fork against a plate, at the sudden bark of a distant dog. Ellie, remembering Caroline's words, tried a gentle approach. "Good morning, Lily," she said softly, offering a small, encouraging smile. "Would you like to come help me feed the gentle horses later? They love carrots." She hoped her calm demeanor and the promise of a peaceful activity might tempt the child. But Lily simply shook her head, her grip tightening on her stuffed horse. Her eyes darted towards the stables, visible through the kitchen window, a flash of fear passing over her face. Then, without a word, she turned and scurried back towards the hallway, disappearing into the quiet depths of the house. Carolyn offered Ellie an apologetic shrug, her own sadness evident. That afternoon, after her stable duties were done, Ellie decided to try a different tactic. Instead of bringing Lily to the horses, she would bring a horse to Lily. She carefully led Blossom, a docile old mare with a kind eye and a penchant for gentle affection, to the fenced pasture closest to the main house. She positioned Blossom so the mare was clearly visible from the kitchen windows in the back porch. Then Ellie began to groom Blossom, talking to her in a low, soothing voice, running the brush through her mane with long, rhythmic strokes. "That's a good girl, Blossom," she murmured, even though the mare didn't need grooming. "Such a pretty coat. You're so gentle, aren't you?" She continued for what felt like an hour, the sun warm on her back, the gentle swish of the brush, a calming sound. She glanced occasionally toward the house but saw no sign of Lily. Just as she was about to give up for the day, a small shadow detached itself from the back door. Lily, still clutching her stuffed horse, crept onto the back porch. She didn't come closer, but she stood there, watching, her small frame partially obscured by a potted fern. Her eyes, however, were fixed on Blossom and Ellie. It was a small victory, almost imperceptible, but Ellie felt a surge of quiet hope. The little girl was watching. Later that night, just as Ellie was drifting off to sleep in her cozy loft, her phone buzzed again. Ben. This time, his voice was utterly stripped of its forced confidence, replaced by genuine desperation and frantic urgency. Mom, you have to help me, please. I, I owe money. A lot of money. Ellie sat bolt upright. What are you talking about, Ben? What kind of money? Gambling debts, he confessed, his voice trembling. $2,000, maybe more. I don't know exactly. They said there would be consequences if I don't pay by the end of the week. The fear in his voice was palpable, raw and untainted by Serena's influence. It pierced through his usual weakness, revealing a scared young man beneath. Ellie's mind reeled. $2,000. It was an insurmountable sum for her, a world away from her meager income. She had nothing. Yet the sound of his genuine terror, the echo of her son, pulled at her heartstrings. She couldn't abandon him, no matter how much he had hurt her. I'll see what I can do, Ben, she heard herself say, the promise feeling impossibly heavy on her tongue. She hung up, her gaze drifting out the small window of her loft, across the moonlit pastures. Below, she could feel the presence of Shadow, still and silent in his stall. She thought of Lily, a tiny, fragile figure consumed by fear. And she thought of herself, adrift and broken, struggling to piece her own life back together. Three broken souls, each in their own prison of trauma and loss. Could they, she wondered, somehow heal each other? Could her own forgotten strengths, the resilience forged on her farm, be enough to mend not just her, but them too? 2 weeks folded into each other, each day bringing Ellie closer to the rhythm of the Sterling estate. She fell into a comfortable routine, her days filled with the familiar sense of hay and horses, the quiet hum of stable life. Slowly and perceptibly, the rigid tension in Shadow's stall began to ease. He no longer pressed himself against the back wall. He watched her now, his eyes less vacant, more alert. The biggest victory came when he finally accepted a carrot from her outstretched hand, his velvety muzzle brushing against her palm, a tentative bridge forming between their wounded souls. Ellie cherished these small moments, finding a quiet purpose in coaxing life back into the magnificent stallion. One crisp afternoon, as Ellie was mucking out the stalls, she overheard Caroline on the phone in the adjacent tack room. Caroline's voice, usually calm and composed, was laced with a raw edge of desperation. "Cole," she pleaded, "the nightmares are getting worse." And she still won't speak. Not a word since the accident, except for that one time. Ellie paused her work, her heart sinking as she realized they were discussing Lily. "Selective mutism," Caroline whispered. "And the night terrors are just heartbreaking." A cold dread seeped into Ellie's bones as she heard the doctor's detached, clinical tone through the receiver, recommending what sounded like institutionalization for Lily. "Richard agrees," Caroline admitted, her voice cracking. "He says we're running out of options." The line went silent for a long moment, punctuated only by Caroline's ragged breathing. Later, Caroline found Ellie in the stables, her face pale, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Ellie," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I just don't know what to do. They want to send Lily away to an inpatient facility. My own little girl. I feel like I'm losing her piece by piece. We've tried everything. Therapy, medication. Nothing works." She wrung her hands, a picture of a mother's profound grief and helplessness. "I can't lose her, Ellie. I just can't." Ellie's heart ached for Caroline, for Lily. Her own experience of loss, of feeling utterly helpless, resonated deeply. She looked at Shadow, who was now gazing at her with a gentle curiosity. A desperate idea sparked in her mind. A long shot, but what else was there? She decided to take Shadow out of his stall, leading him gently into the wide central aisle of the stable. The movement was a big step for him, and he was still tense, but he followed her on. Ellie began to talk, not directly to Lily, but loudly enough to Carrie, her voice echoing softly in the large space. She started by describing her mundane day, then slowly, deliberately began to share her own past trauma. You know, Shadow, she said, stroking his dark mane, her voice even and calm. It's funny how fear works. Sometimes when I was younger, after a particularly bad harvest, or when my late husband, he wasn't always a kind man when he'd been drinking, I used to hide, right here in the barn. She spoke plainly, without self-pity, just as she would to an old friend. I felt safer with the animals than I did in the house sometimes. They didn't judge. They just listened. She paused, taking a deep breath. She could almost feel the presence of someone listening from the house, a little ear straining to hear. But hiding, Ellie continued, her voice gaining a quiet intensity, it doesn't make the fear go away, does it? It just makes your world smaller. You think you're protecting yourself, but really you're just putting walls around your own heart. She looked directly at Shadow, but her words were for the little girl she hoped was listening. In the world outside those walls, it can be scary, but it can also be so beautiful, full of light and laughter and even a little magic. As if on cue, a small, pale face appeared at the kitchen window, peeking through the curtains. Lily. Then slowly, cautiously, she emerged from the back door, still clutching her beloved stuffed horse, her eyes wide and fixed on Shadow. She didn't come close, remaining on the porch, a tiny statue of observation. Ellie continued to brush Shadow, talking softly, until a tiny voice, barely a whisper, floated across the stable yard. "Mrs. Ellie," Lily asked, her voice raspy from disuse, "is he scared?" Ellie's heart swelled with a cautious hope. "Yes, sweet pea," she answered, turning to face Lily fully, but keeping her distance, not wanting to spook the fragile child. Shadow was in a big accident, a trailer wreck. He got hurt, but he also got very, very scared. And now he's scared of new things, of leaving his safe place, of trusting that everything will be okay. Ellie met Lily's gaze, her eyes kind and understanding. "Kind of like you, I think." Lily's small hand trembled slightly as she clutched her stuffed horse tighter. Then, with a surprising strength in her voice, a newfound conviction, she said, "The therapist says it's my fault because I can't remember the accident." Tears welled in her big blue eyes, the unspoken burden of guilt she carried finally revealed. Ellie knelt, bringing herself to Lily's eye level. "Oh, Lilybug," she whispered, "that's not true at all. You know what? Sometimes grown-ups don't know everything." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Your mind is just protecting you. It's a very smart brain, that brain of yours. It's trying to keep you safe from a very scary memory, and that's okay. It's not your fault you don't remember." Lily took a tentative step closer, then another. Her eyes, still tear-filled, now held a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of hope. "Shadow still remembers, though, doesn't he?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Shadow remembers the fear, yes," Ellie affirmed, "but he's learning to remember the good things, too. He's learning to trust again, little by little." Ellie gently guided Shadow's head forward, demonstrating how he now took a carrot from her hand. "See? Trust takes patience and it takes choice. He chooses to trust me because I'm patient with him. And you can choose to trust again too, when you're ready." Lily, with a breathtaking surge of courage, took a few more steps until she was standing just outside the stable aisle, close enough for Shadow to extend his muzzle towards her. His nostrils flared, taking in her scent, and he gently nudged her hand. Lily gasped, a tiny sound of wonder, and then whispered, "He remembers me." A slow, radiant smile spread across her face, transforming her features, chasing away the shadows of fear and sadness. It was the first genuine smile Ellie had seen on the little girl's face, a beacon of hope in the twilight of the stable. Don't miss a single beat of this unfolding drama. If you're invested in Ellie's journey, hit that like button, share this story with a friend, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. Now let's see what happens next. The evening light was fading, painting the stable yard in hues of orange and purple, when Caroline found Ellie in the small, cozy stable office, tidying up some paperwork. Caroline's eyes were red, but they weren't swollen with sadness as they had been that morning. Instead, they shone with tears of profound relief, a raw vulnerability that melted Ellie's heart. "Ellie," Caroline began, her voice a little shaky, but filled with an almost disbelieving joy. She talked, Lily. She talked to me for an entire hour. Carolyn sank into the worn armchair across from Ellie, covering her face with her hands, a torrent of emotion washing over her. She talked about you, about Shadow, about how he was scared, just like her. And then she told me everything. Ellie waited, her breath held, a premonition settling in her gut. Carolyn looked up, her gaze fixed on Ellie, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. She remembers the accident, Ellie. Not just bits, but she remembered what happened before it. She said Richard was driving, and he was drunk. A cold shock ran through Ellie. Drunk driving. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. The severity of Lily's trauma, the mute terror, the flinching at loud noises, it all made a terrible, tragic sense. And that's not even the worst of it, Carolyn continued, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. Richard made her promise. He told her she couldn't tell anyone. He said it would be her fault if he got in trouble. A 5-year-old Ellie. He made her carry that secret, that immense burden, and told her it was her responsibility. Ellie felt a wave of righteous anger course through her, the selective mutism, the constant fear, the self-blame. It wasn't just the trauma of the accident. It was the crushing weight of a child's secret, an adult's monstrous deception, and the terror of believing herself responsible for her father's potential downfall. Lily hadn't just been scared, she had been silenced, made to feel complicit, her innocence corrupted by an adult's selfishness. "What kind of man?" Carolyn whispered, her voice breaking. "What kind of man puts that burden on a 5-year-old?" Tears streamed freely down her face now, but they were tears of sorrow mixed with an almost fierce determination. "I can't let that stand, Ellie. I won't." Carolyn took a deep, shuddering breath, then straightened her shoulders. Her eyes, though still red, now held a steely resolve. "I've filed for separation. Richard is moving out tomorrow morning. He's furious, of course, but he has no ground to stand on. Not with what Lily remembers." She let out a shaky laugh that was half sob, half exhilaration. "I feel terrified, relieved, and absolutely free all at once." She reached across the desk, grabbing Ellie's hands, her grip surprisingly strong. "Ellie, I don't know how to thank you. In 2 weeks, you've done more for both of them, for Lily, for Shadow, than months of professional therapy, expensive doctors, and all our desperate attempts. You gave Lily her voice back. You gave Shadow a chance. You gave me back my daughter." Her gratitude was profound, sincere, and utterly overwhelming. Just then, Ellie's phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw the text from Ben. "Mama, we need to talk in person. It's about the money I owe. These people aren't going to wait much longer." The words, though succinct, carried an undeniable undercurrent of urgency, even menace. A pang of fear for her son, misguided and self-destructive though he might be, shot through her. She looked at Caroline, whose face, despite the lingering traces of tears, was alight with a newfound hope for Lily. For the first time in a long time, Ellie felt truly valued, truly needed. She saw the direct, profound impact she was having on Caroline and Lily, on Shadow. Ben's demands felt like a pull back into a world of endless disappointment and emotional drain. But she couldn't simply abandon him. He was still her son. Ellie made a critical decision, a quiet resolve hardening within her. She took a deep breath. "Caroline," she said, "I know this is a lot to ask, especially now, but Ben, my son, he's in some trouble. He needs $2,000 and he needs it fast. Would it be possible for me to get an advance on my salary? I'll work it off, every single penny, no matter how long it takes. I can do extra hours, whatever you need." Caroline didn't hesitate. Her gaze was direct, understanding, and without a trace of judgment. She simply picked up her checkbook from the desk, uncapped her pen, and began to write. "How much do you need for now?" she asked, her voice calm and firm. "We can sort out the rest later." Ellie knew the full amount was impossible, but even a portion would buy Ben some time, some breathing room. 500 would be a tremendous help, she admitted, her voice thick with gratitude. Without a word, Caroline tore out the check and handed it to Ellie. You've given me more than money could ever buy, Ellie. This is the least I can do. As Ellie took the crisp check, her fingers brushing against Caroline's, a profound sense of purpose washed over her. She was here in this place doing this work for a reason. She was helping a child find her voice, helping a magnificent animal heal, and helping a woman reclaim her life. And she was, in her own quiet way, still trying to save her son. She was exactly where she was meant to be. The days that followed Caroline's confession and Lily's breakthrough were nothing short of miraculous. Lily's transformation blossomed with breathtaking speed. The silence that had shrouded her for months lifted like a morning mist. She spent hours with Shadow, brushing his coat, whispering secrets into his ear, her laughter ringing freely through the stable yard, a joyous sound that had been absent for far too long. Shadow, too, seemed to find new life, his eyes bright, his movements more relaxed, a willing participant in Lily's renewed joy. Ellie watched them, her heart full, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The fragile peace shattered late Friday afternoon when an expensive, flashy black sedan, a model Ellie didn't recognize, pulled up the long driveway. Ben emerged from the driver's seat, looking terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes sunken, and his usually neat hair was disheveled. Desperation clung to him like a shroud. Ellie led him away from the stables towards a quieter corner of the pasture, instinctively shielding Lily from his troubled presence. "What is it, Ben?" she asked, her voice laced with a mother's weary concern. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting nervously around. "Mom, it's bad, really bad. The gambling, it got out of control." He confessed, his voice barely above a whisper, the bravado gone, replaced by a raw, unvarnished fear. "Serena, she kept pushing me. High risk, high reward," she'd say, always wanting more, wanting the next big thing. Ellie listened, a cold dread creeping through her. She had always suspected Serena's influence played a part in Ben's reckless behavior, but to hear it confirmed with such devastating consequences was a bitter pill. "How much, Ben?" she asked, her voice calm despite the churning in her stomach. He swallowed hard. 25,000 to loan sharks. He pulled up his sleeve, revealing a nasty bruise blooming on his forearm, a dark purple splotch against his pale skin. That was their message. "They're not playing around, Mom. They want their money." Then came the next blow. "Serena's gone, Mom. She left 3 days ago, took half the furniture, half our savings, and went back to her mother's. Said she couldn't deal with this mess anymore." Ellie felt a strange mix of emotions. A bitter vindication that Serena was finally revealed for what she was, and a deep sadness for her son, left alone to face the consequences of his folly. "I need your help, Mom," Ben pleaded, his eyes wide and desperate. "You have to talk to the Sterlings. They're rich, Mom. They could easily lend us the money. I know they like you. You could convince them." His voice was frantic, bordering on hysterical. "It's not just 25,000 anymore. With the interest, it's closer to 40. They're going to come after me, Mom, I know it." Ellie looked at her son, at the man he had become, broken by his own choices, yet still seeking an easy way out, still willing to exploit the kindness of others. "No, Ben," she said, her voice firm, resolute. I will not exploit Caroline's kindness, or Richard's. They have been good to me, given me a home, given me purpose. I will not become a beggar, even for you." His face twisted into a mask of pure rage. "Selfish. That's what you are, Mom. Always so selfish. It's no wonder Dad left. He escaped, you know. He escaped you." The cruel words, a revision of history designed to inflict maximum pain, cut her to the bone. Her late husband's drinking, the secrets she had carried, the quiet strength with which she had held their family together, all dismissed, twisted into an accusation. "Get out, Ben," she said, her voice trembling but unwavering. "Just go. I can't look at you right now." Ben glared at her one last time, then spun on his heel and stormed back towards his expensive car. He was about to open the door when the black sedan, which had been lurking further down the driveway, suddenly pulled up with a screech of tires. 2 men emerged, their figures silhouetted against the setting sun. One was tall and powerfully built, his suit straining across his shoulders. The other was smaller, wirier, with a cruel glint in his eyes. "Benjamin Davies, I presume?" the larger man rumbled, his voice low and menacing. We've been looking for you. He then turned his attention to Ellie, a calculating stare raking over her. And you must be his mother, the one who works for the rich folks. The Sterlings, isn't it? Very deep pockets, we hear. Ben blanched, his desperate pleas for his mother to intercede dying on his lips. Mom, please, he whispered, his eyes wide with terror. Ellie met the man's gaze, her spine stiffening with a familiar farm-bred resilience. I have nothing to do with my son's debts, she stated, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. And I will not betray the trust of the Sterlings. They are good people. The man smiled, a cold, humorless baring of teeth. Trust, loyalty, very quaint, old woman. He pulled out his phone, tapping at the screen. Let's see how loyal you are. He turned the phone towards her. On the screen, a series of photos flashed. Aerial shots of the Sterling estate, the stables, the main house, then a close-up, a chillingly clear image of Lily, laughing as she brushed shadow, her bright hair catching the sunlight. Ellie's blood ran cold. The unspoken threat was clear, monstrous. They wouldn't just go after Ben. They would go after Lily, after Caroline, after everything Ellie had come to cherish. Well, the man prompted, his smile widening, enjoying her terror. Still won't help your son then? Still won't ask your rich friends for a little loan? Ellie looked from the menacing men to her son, who stood trembling, a figure of utter despair. She was trapped, presented with an impossible choice: betray the Sterlings or risk Lily's safety. When something happens to me, just remember that you could have prevented it, Ben whispered, his voice choked with bitterness. A final cruel twist of the knife before the men grabbed him and shoved him into their sedan. The following morning, Ellie found herself watching Caroline and Lily happily grooming Shadow. Lily chattered away, her small hands deftly running a brush through Shadow's mane, her laughter echoing with innocent joy. Caroline watched her daughter with a soft smile, her own face radiating a peace Ellie hadn't seen in weeks. The idyllic scene was a stark, brutal contrast to the menacing shadows of the loan sharks and the terror that had gripped Ellie just hours before. Lily looked up, her blue eyes bright. Mama, I talked to Daddy last night, she announced. Caroline's smile wavered slightly, but she nodded, encouraging her daughter. I told him I'm not scared anymore, Lily continued, her voice clear and strong. And I told him I'd only see him if he promised to tell the truth. Caroline's eyes welled with tears, a silent acknowledgement of her daughter's newfound courage. Lily then turned to Ellie, her head tilted, a thoughtful expression on her face. Mrs. Ellie, she asked, her voice innocent and probing, do you have any family secrets? The question, delivered with childlike candor, landed squarely in Ellie's chest. The profound irony of her situation, burdened by her own son's dangerous secrets, struck her with brutal force. She felt a wave of nausea. Ellie forced a smile, unwilling to shatter the fragile peace Lily and Caroline had built. Everything's fine, darling, she said, lying through her teeth, her voice a little too bright. Caroline gave her a questioning glance, but Ellie quickly averted her eyes, hoping her strained demeanor wouldn't betray her. That night, sleep was a cruel stranger. Ellie tossed and turned, tormented by Ben's desperate words, by the chilling image of Lily's photograph in the loan shark's hand. The impossible decision weighed on her like a physical burden. Betray the trust of the kind people who had given her a home, or watch her son face terrifying consequences, knowing a child's safety could also be at risk. At precisely 3 a.m., her phone buzzed, vibrating violently against the wooden nightstand. The caller ID read, Dr. Olivia Reed, Riverside General. Ellie's blood ran cold. She knew with a dreadful certainty what the call was about. Mrs. Davies? The doctor's voice was calm, professional, yet carried a grave undertone. Your son, Ben, has been admitted. He's been severely beaten. He's stable now, but he's asking for you. Ellie dressed in a daze, her hands fumbling with buttons. The drive to the hospital was a blur of fear and frantic prayer. She found Ben in a dimly lit room, his face swollen and bruised, one eye completely shut. He was barely recognizable. Mom, he croaked, his voice thick with pain and fear. It was just a warning. They said next time they won't stop. His words, whispered through gritted teeth, confirmed her worst fears. A kind-faced nurse, Dr. Reed, checked on Ben. "He needs real help, Mrs. Davies," she said to Ellie, her voice low and serious, once they were out of earshot. "Not just for his injuries. This kind of violence usually means there's a deeper problem. If he doesn't get it, his situation will only get worse." Ellie nodded numbly, the weight of her son's self-destruction pressing down on her. The next morning, Ellie called Caroline, explaining that she would be late, vaguely citing a family emergency. Caroline, ever gracious, offered genuine concern. "Is everything all right, Ellie?" she asked. "Is there anything we can do to help?" It was her chance, a clear invitation to ask for the money to save Ben. But Ellie couldn't do it. She couldn't betray their trust, couldn't ask them to pay for Ben's self-inflicted problems. The unspoken image of Lily's smiling face was too vivid. "No, Caroline, thank you," Ellie replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Everything will be fine. I just needed to handle something." When she returned to Ben's hospital room, he looked at her with desperate, swollen eyes. "Did you ask them, Mom? Did you get the money?" Ellie shook her head, her gaze steady. "No, Ben, I didn't. I told you I won't exploit their kindness for your choices." His face contorted into a mask of bitter accusation. "So you're just going to let them kill me?" "You made your choices, Ben," Ellie said, her voice heavy with sorrow, but unyielding. "You have to face the consequences." The words felt like a betrayal, yet she knew deep down they were the truth he needed to hear. As she walked out of the hospital, heading towards the parking garage, the black sedan was waiting. The two men from yesterday emerged, their faces grim. The larger man held up his phone, displaying fresh photos of Lily playing in the stable yard. Then a wider shot of the Sterling estate. "About 8 hours, old woman," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any humor. "The interest keeps growing, and we don't like to wait." The threat was explicit, undeniable. Ellie returned to the estate in a haze of fury and despair. Fury at Ben, at the men, at the impossible situation. Despair for the innocence that was now threatened. Caroline, seeing the haunted look in Ellie's eyes, immediately sensed something was terribly wrong. She gently took Ellie's arm. "Ellie, you look like you've seen a ghost. Come inside, have some tea and sandwiches. You look like you need it." Inside, Lily, sensing Ellie's profound sadness, approached her, her small hand reaching out tentatively. "When I have sad days, Shadow makes me feel better," she said, her voice soft and knowing. "Maybe he could help you too." Lily then demonstrated Shadow's new trick, holding out her hand. Shadow gently nudged her palm with his muzzle, a soft thank you. Lily beamed, then, with an almost unnerving wisdom for a child so young, Lily looked at Ellie, her blue eyes filled with an old soul's understanding. "Bad people," she began, her voice gaining a quiet intensity. "They try to make you scared so you'll do bad things. But when you do bad things because you're scared, you just become bad people too." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within Ellie, cutting through the haze of her panic. Lily, the child who had found her voice and her courage, had just given Ellie a crucial piece of guidance. The chilling deadline of 48 hours echoed in Ellie's mind, each passing minute a drumbeat of impending doom. With barely 24 hours left, Lily's profound words from earlier that day echoed in her ears. "Bad people try to make you scared, so you'll do bad things. But when you do bad things because you're already scared, you just become bad people too." The truth in them was undeniable, piercing through the fog of her fear. Late that evening, as Ellie sat alone in her loft, wrestling with the impossible choice, her phone rang. It was Caroline. "Ellie, I've been thinking about you," Caroline said, her voice soft but filled with an unwavering warmth. "You haven't been yourself today. Whatever's troubling you, please know you don't have to face it alone. We're here for you. You've become family to us, Ellie. You truly have." Caroline's words, offered with such unconditional support and genuine affection, were the lifeline Ellie desperately needed. They gave her the immense courage that Ben's desperate pleas could not shatter. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and the truth, raw and ugly, began to pour out. "Caroline," Ellie started, her voice trembling. "There's something I have to tell you. It's about Ben and the money I told you he needed." She confessed everything from Ben's escalating gambling addiction, fueled by Serena's greed, to the loan sharks, the escalating debts, Ben's brutal beating, And finally, the chilling, direct threats against Lily, complete with the photographs of the estate and Lily playing with Shadow. A long silence followed Ellie's confession, a silence so heavy Ellie thought her heart might burst. Then, Carolyn spoke, her voice surprisingly calm, though laced with a deep sadness. "Thank you, Ellie," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for telling me the truth, even when you were scared. You chose to protect Lily over protecting yourself, over protecting your son from his own mistakes. That's not the action of someone I'd ever want to lose." Carolyn's words were a balm to Ellie's frayed nerves, a confirmation that she had finally done the right thing. The next morning, Ellie was startled to see a police car parked outside the Sterling estate. Two uniformed officers were speaking quietly with Caroline near the main house. A wave of panic washed over Ellie, but she pushed it down, reminding herself of her choice. She walked towards them, her steps firm. "Ellie, these are Officers Davies and Miller," Caroline introduced, her voice calm. "They've been waiting for you." The older officer, a kind-faced woman with steady eyes, stepped forward. "Mrs. Davies," she began, her tone professional, "we understand you have some information regarding a loan shark organization. We've been tracking these individuals for some time. Your information, combined with what Mrs. Sterling has told us, is crucial for us to make an arrest." Ellie felt a profound sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't just her word. Carolyn had clearly confirmed her story, solidifying her choice. She provided every detail she knew, the names, the threats, the timeline. The officers listened intently, nodding occasionally. Within hours, Ben was transferred from Riverside General to protective custody in a secure hospital wing. Safe from the immediate danger of the loan sharks, he would now have the opportunity to face his addiction and the legal consequences of his actions in a structured, protected environment. Ellie spent the afternoon giving her detailed statement to a pair of detectives at the local precinct. They were patient and understanding, assuring her that she had done the right thing by speaking up. "It's hard, Mrs. Davies," one detective said, "but speaking truth to fear is how we help people. You've helped not just your son, but potentially countless others this organization preys upon." That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the stable yard in soft golden hues, Ellie walked into the stable to check on Shadow. She found Lily inside his stall, perched on a bale of hay, a large picture book open on her lap. Shadow stood patiently beside her, his head low, his eyes half closed, a picture of complete ease and affection. Lily was reading to him, her small voice a melodic murmur in the quiet stable. Lily looked up, her face beaming with pride. "Mama told me some bad people were trying to scare you," she said, her blue eyes wide and earnest. "Did you tell the truth even though you were scared?" Ellie knelt, her eyes meeting Lily's. "Yes, sweet pea," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I did. I was very, very scared. But I told the truth." Lily nodded, a profound wisdom etched on her young face. "Shadow says that's the bravest thing anyone can do." She patted Shadow's neck, and the magnificent stallion, as if understanding every word, gently nudged his head against Ellie's shoulder, a gesture of deep trust and affection that would have been utterly impossible just weeks ago. As Shadow's soft muzzle rested against her, Ellie felt a profound shift within herself. The fear, the shame, the crushing weight of her own past, they began to recede, replaced by a quiet strength, a sense of rightness. She had chosen love over fear, truth over silence, and in doing so she had not only protected Lily, but had also, perhaps, finally begun to heal herself. 6 months painted a landscape of incredible transformation. The stable, once a place of quiet despair for Shadow and Lily, now vibrated with life and laughter. Shadow, the magnificent black stallion, was a completely changed animal. The tension that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a calm, joyful demeanor. He performed little tricks for Lily, bowing his head gently for a carrot, nuzzling her hair with affectionate curiosity. He was no longer just a horse. He was a therapy horse, a gentle giant who had healed alongside a little girl. Ellie often reflected on how much had changed, not just for Shadow and Lily, but for herself. Thanks to her courageous information, the vicious loan shark operation that had preyed on so many, including Ben, had been completely shut down. Several arrests had been made, bringing a measure of justice and safety to the community. Ben himself had served 6 months in a minimum security facility. It had been a harsh, necessary awakening. During her visits, Ellie had seen a genuine desire in him to get really clean, not just from gambling, but from the insidious patterns of lying and manipulation that had consumed him. On her last visit, he had held her hand, tears streaming down his bruised face. "Mom," he choked out, "I just want to be the son you deserved." Ellie had squeezed his hand, her own eyes moist. "You already are, Ben," she had reassured him, using the name she still felt in her heart. "You just forgot for a while. Now it's time to remember." One bright spring afternoon, Caroline introduced Ellie to Dr. Ethan Miller. He was a tall, kind man with warm eyes, a child psychologist who specialized in equine therapy. He had spent weeks observing Ellie, captivated by her intuitive understanding of trauma recovery, her quiet patience with Shadow, and her remarkable connection with Lily. "Ellie," Dr. Miller began, a genuine smile gracing his lips, "I've been incredibly impressed with your work here. Your approach, your ability to connect with both animals and children in distress, it's a rare gift. Carolyn and I have been discussing it, and we'd like to offer you a position." Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "A position?" "Yes," he confirmed, his eyes twinkling. "We're launching a new therapeutic writing program here at the estate for children who've experienced trauma. We'd like you to be our lead instructor." He outlined the details: full benefits, a starting salary of $45,000 annually. It wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a purpose that resonated with every fiber of her being. Just then, Lily, who had been listening from the stable entrance, burst in. "Does that mean me and Shadow will still be involved?" she asked excitedly, her face alight with hope. Dr. Miller laughed, a warm, reassuring sound. "Absolutely, Lily. Shadow will be our star therapy horse, and you, my dear, will be his most important assistant." That evening, as the last rays of sunlight bathed the pasture in a golden glow, Caroline joined Ellie on the stable porch swing. "Ellie," Caroline began, her voice soft, "do you ever regret it, choosing to protect us over Ben?" Ellie looked out at the peaceful landscape, a quiet certainty settling in her soul. "No, Caroline," she said firmly, "I don't. It was the hardest thing I ever had to do, to turn my back on my son when he was desperate. But I realized that enabling him, protecting him from the consequences of his actions, wasn't love. It was just prolonging his suffering, and it would have put you and Lily in danger. It was the best thing for him, even if it didn't feel like it at the time." Carolyn nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I understand that now," she confessed. "I used to think that keeping secrets, protecting Richard's reputation, was about love. But it wasn't. It was just enabling dysfunction, burying the truth until it festered. You taught me that true love, true strength, comes from facing the truth, no matter how hard." Just then, a familiar, albeit subdued, black sedan pulled up the driveway. Ben. He had been released early for good behavior and was now staying at a local halfway house. He emerged from the car, looking leaner, his eyes clearer. He still had a long road ahead, but the change was visible, tangible. He walked towards them, a genuine, if still tentative, smile on his face. Lily, spotting him, ran to him, and he scooped her up, a tenderness in his embrace that warmed Ellie's heart. "Mom," Ben said, his voice tinged with a humility that had been absent for years. "I have a job interview tomorrow. Honest work, maintenance at the community center." He met her gaze, his eyes full of regret and gratitude. "I know I messed up, Mom, really badly. But you're the one who gives love without keeping score. Always have been." Lily, still in Ben's arms, looked at her father and then at Ellie. "Mrs. Ellie helped us remember," she announced, her small voice carrying an old soul's wisdom, "that being scared doesn't mean being broken." Ellie smiled, a genuine, deep-seated joy filling her. Later, as the stars began to pepper the inky sky, she made one last check on Shadow. She ran her hand along his soft muzzle, his warm breath a comfort against her palm. Their shared journey from brokenness to healing had taught her the most profound lesson, that love, real love, meant choosing what was right, even when it was the hardest path. Her phone buzzed, a soft chime in the quiet stable. A text from Dr. Miller. Start date confirmed. Welcome to the team, Ellie. Ellie looked out at the moonlit pastures, a future filled with purpose stretching before her. She had lost her farm, her old life, but she had found something infinitely more valuable: a new family, a renewed sense of self, and a true calling. She had found everything she truly needed and more.